Hey guys, welcome back to the course. In this lecture, we will go through multiple examples that cover almost all types of functions you are most likely going to encounter in a real world. We start off with a very basic function. We have two variables, name and age, and both of them have their respective values. Then we declare a function using a keyword called depth. This is how functions are defined in Python. This function has a name called details, and it has no arguments, which is indicated by empty circular brackets. Our code logic will reside within this function as it's given here. We are simply combining the variable values with some additional text and printing it out. Now we have defined the function and added the code logic within it. But how do we actually execute it? For that, we just need to call this function using its name as a regular statement like this. At runtime, this function call will be replaced by the actual code and everything we have written within the function will be executed. Let's now run the code and see what we get. As you can see, we have the appropriate statement printed on the console. Let's look at the next example. This is also a simple function with no arguments. The only difference is that we are actively asking for information from the user at runtime instead of initializing the variables beforehand. The code is asking for user's name and age and then simply printing it out. Let's run this and see how it goes. As you can see, we are presented with a prompt to enter our name followed by our age, and the information is then printed on the console. Now here we are branching off to the second category of functions which are defined with additional arguments or parameters. Let's now look at this function. It's a very simple function that is supposed to add two values, a and b. If you notice, we have not initialized the variables a and b with any values. The objective is to pass the values at runtime. What this function is basically saying is that two values corresponding to variables a and b should be provided at runtime, which will then be added and printed on the console. In order to call this function, we have to make sure that we pass the same number of values as the number of arguments. Since this function had two arguments, we need to pass two values at runtime. Here the two values that we have provided are 3 and 6, which means that we should have their total printed when we run the program. Let's do that and see what we get. As you can see, it successfully printed the number 9 on the console. Let's look at this next example, which is also a variation of the function with arguments. Here the first argument is a word CIDR, or CIDR as it's commonly called in the networking world. This is a standard argument. You can name it anything. I have personally named it CIDR so that it is easy to correlate this name with the value we will be passing later on. The second argument though is quite special. In the previous example, I mentioned that the number of arguments at the definition stage and the number of values during runtime should match. But what if that's not possible for some reason? Let's say you have a requirement where you do not want to hard code everything and you need some flexibility to pass additional values at runtime. With the earlier example, you couldn't do that. That's where the special argument comes in. It basically allows us to pass multiple values at runtime without having to declare their corresponding arguments during the definition stage. If you look at the meat of this code, we are basically running a simple for loop to go over each value in the args tuple. And this if condition is checking the value of the first argument, CIDR, and if it's 16, then it's printing out the network address of each IP. Remember, at this stage, this code is not active, so please don't get confused by thinking how this value of 16 is being passed. It becomes active only when if it is actually called. That's when the arguments are replaced by their values. Let's look at the function call now. The first value is 16, which corresponds to the argument CIDR because the order of the argument and its value matters. This means that the value of CIDR will automatically become 16 as soon as the program is run. After that, we have three IP addresses as values. This is the magic of that special argument. It can accept multiple values, which means that we don't need to abide by the rule of having the same number of values as the number of arguments. Let's run the program now and see what we get. As you can see, it successfully printed the network address of all three IP addresses based on the CIDR value of 16. I hope these examples were good enough to explain the usefulness and applicability of Python functions and how they can be used to simplify the code by breaking it into smaller modules. So with that, I thank you for joining me in this journey, and I hope you find the rest of the course useful as well.